people get a step up in basis on your taxable accounts. Appreciated assets can be given to organizations, and they get that at no tax consequences. Will your tax rate rise? And this is personally when you're factoring in those income sources of Social Security, of required minimum distributions. And then for those that want to factor in, well, what happens if the tax laws change and we go from the 12% to the 15% or the 22% to the 25%? We kind of talked about that in our last class last week and what the history has been. We're in a low tax rate environment. Pre-retirees and retirees vote, so you kind of put your weight on that. And then phase outs and modified adjusted gross income limits. So what this is the two big ones are Medicare premiums known as IRMAA. If you get up to certain thresholds, and they look back 2 years. So for 2026 premiums, they're looking at 2024 income. For married filing jointly, you need to be like 218,000 roughly. Cut that in half for single to be around those thresholds. And then if you are accessing money pre-59.5, or if you're on the Affordable Care Act and you're using premium tax credits, you want to take that into account. If you're doing Roth conversions, that's realizing income. What does that do to your premium tax credits? That could be $1,000+ a month. And then taxes on Social Security. So doing Roth conversions, is that going to help out your Social Security later when you start collecting at age 67, 70, whatever age it might be? If you get a kind of a jump at it a little bit earlier in your 60s or earlier. There's some people out there in cases where their Social Security, instead of being 85% taxable, maybe it's 50% or maybe it's 0%. And we'll talk about more of that next week when we talk about the retirement windows. And then the marginal tax bracket optimization is in regards to, so let's say you retire and you are in a low income environment where you're in the 10 and 12% bracket for your taxable income. And then later on down the road when you start doing required minimum distributions, you jump up into the 22 or 24%. Well, would it have been better if you would have stayed kind of even it out all the way across to the 12% instead of being really low, paying almost no taxes, and then getting jumped up later when required minimum distributions hit? So that's kind of the tax bracket optimization of, does it make sense to even out my taxes instead of paying little to nothing and then getting bumped up later on? So strategic Roth conversions can happen even before retirement. Income disruptions. You know, there's people that in their 30s, 40s, that it can make sense because maybe they were laid off, maybe they decided to start a business, maybe they decided to stay home with their kids. Whatever the case may be, their income was lower and they can maybe it makes sense to convert in the 12%, for an example. That does happen. Not everybody realizes it and take advantage of it. And then outside of that, the early retirement years, depending on, and we'll talk about this when we get to those options, does it make sense for people who are retiring early to do Roth conversions because of they're able to fill up those lower tax brackets depending on where their income is coming from. If it's coming from taxable brokerage accounts, they're going to have a little bit more options available. Market down. So is the market down? You are able to move more shares, meaning more money, from your traditional IRA to your Roth IRA. So that's a bigger win than if the market was up. So we don't like when the market goes down, but it can be advantageous for somebody who's already planning on doing Roth conversions. Let's say somebody is planning on doing $100,000 in 2026. The market's down middle of the year. They normally convert in Q4, but the market's down in the middle of the year, so they're going to do partial of that 100,000 when the market's down. And then in Q4, they're going to reevaluate, does it make sense to do any more or in how much? But they're moving more shares when the market's down. And then paying tax from cash flow, whether it's from your bank, credit union, brokerage accounts, is ideal. It's not an absolute deal breaker if you have to pay it from on the conversion from your traditional IRA. However, you want to take that into account. Just like you would want to take into account the premium tax credits, the IRMA, all those factors, because the conversion isn't as much if you're paying tax on the conversion. So if you convert $100,000, but you're going to withhold taxes at 15%, well, that's $15,000 less that's going to grow in the Roth IRA because you didn't have money outside to pay for it. Again, not a deal breaker, but you want to take that into consideration. And then ideally, you do it in quarter 4 because your income is known. The later on during the year, okay, we talked about unexpected events, unexpected expenses in a class. Those are less likely to happen. We know where our income sources are already going to be, so we make a more of an educated decision on how much to convert and what those consequences are going to be. So when does a Roth conversion deserve a second look? And this doesn't mean not to do one. This is a process we just need to go through. So when you don't expect to be in a higher bracket, let's say somebody's always going to be in the 12 or whatever bracket, does it make sense to do a Roth conversion? If you're always going to be in that bracket and you're not going to get bumped up later because of required minimum distributions. You can take into account who your heirs are going to be. Maybe you're in the 12, but your kids who are going to inherit it, maybe they're in the 35. Well, then it might make sense. Even though your bracket's not going to change, maybe you are going to foot the bill, so to speak, because they're going to inherit it anyway.
You know, like if the kids inherit the IRA, they get taxed. Right?
Correct, and they have 10 years to deplete the account. So yeah, if somebody's, a doctor or some high-paying professional, when are they going to inherit that money potentially, and what bracket are they in? Because there's some, and this is going to get a little bit into the weeds. I don't want to go there too far, but let's say you have 2 kids. One of them's in the 35, and one of them's in 12. Which asset do you give each kid? It's probably better to give a Roth to the 35 if the assets are even, and 12%, the traditional IRA to the one that's in the 12%. So there's multiple things to consider there. If you have a strong charitable intent, are you going to start doing qualified charitable distributions at 7.5? Are you charitably inclined that's all going to go there anyway, or at least part of it? Are you converting just because you came to this class, or you watched a video, or you just heard about it, or are you doing it more intentionally? Because this does take time to evaluate to make the right decision. If somebody's just going to convert X amount of dollars just because, it's probably not going to be the best move. When you start moving out of the 12% bracket, other considerations start coming up. You start getting into long-term capital gains rates increasing from 0 to 15%. You start losing senior deductions, and that doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't happen right when you get into the 22% bracket, but it happens inside there, so you want to be mindful of that. And same thing with triggering IRMA. That happens a little bit later on, but something to be mindful of. As soon as you start moving out at 12%, these other factors start coming into play. And that's whether you do Roth conversions or whether you choose not to, and your required minimum distributions are a little bit higher. So what's a process that you can follow? Is hopefully basically what I'm going to want to leave you with tonight. One is you want to review your goals, and you want to do this annually, because your life changes, your goals change, the markets change. Model Social Security income, and you don't have to put in stone of when you're going to take it. Let's say somebody's 60 and they are going to put it on pencil that they're going to take it at 67 or 70. Okay, what's the projected amount at that date? And put that down. Model that out. What's that going to be? Same thing with any other income. If you have a pension, when is that going to start? Or if you have rental property, what's that look like? Are you going to keep it the whole time? So get all these known income sources down. What is your projected required minimum distribution going to be starting at 73, at 75? And do these, try to do these in real dollar terms, inflation adjusted. So for example, if you expect your traditional IRA to grow 7% based upon the stock to bond mix in there, factor in inflation. So the real dollar terms, instead of 7%, would be a 4 to 5% return. Because the brackets change with inflation, Social Security changes with inflation, IRMA changes with inflation. So when you're penciling all this out, if you're doing it in a spreadsheet, you want to have that factored in. If you're doing it on planning software, that's going to be included in there. And then identify the bucket amounts. And the reason why here to do this is you can see, am I already heavily overweighted in one account? Meaning traditional account, Roth account, taxable account. Because it might make sense, you want to model this out too, of if I pull from the right accounts a certain amount, do I need to do Roth conversions? Because if I take, 20,000 from my traditional and 20,000 over here, is that going to level out my taxes versus if I would have just pulled everything out from my taxable account for the first number of years and then moved over to this bucket? What if I spread it out? Would that even out the taxes? And then math versus emotions. So you want to do the math. And is there a big opportunity cost? It's going to lean you more than one way. So if you've watched, any videos on Roth conversions, they might throw out there X hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of savings in tax dollars. Well, I'll get to some of those caveats in the next slide here. But you want to get the math out first. And if there's a huge opportunity cost math-wise, then it's going to lean more towards yes, do some Roth conversions, or no, depending on where the math was. But if it's pretty even, like if I'm going to always be in the same bracket, it's going to come down to what do you feel? So that's where the emotions come into play. Because some people are like, I just want to rip this Band-Aid off and get taxes done with. Other people are like, no, I'm okay. I'll let it play out. I've even heard people that have ripped the Band-Aid off and they did it all in one swoop. And they unintentionally had themselves go into the 35, 37% bracket. So either way, you don't want to just rip it off all at once. And you're going to repeat this annually. So here is an example of how to model out those kind of known income sources. So if somebody, an example where somebody retiring at 55 or 60, modeling out all the way out when the pension starts, how much it is. Same thing for Social Security. Same thing for required minimum distributions. And then do this every year. If you start your pension, okay, most of them are not inflation adjusted, so that's going to stay the same. But your required minimum distributions are going to change based upon what the market did, what your assets are in that account. Social Security is going to change depending on what they did for the COLA, the cost of living adjustment. Did they do 2%? Did they do 5%? But once you have the baseline set, it doesn't take too much to update it each year. But this is partly of doing the due diligence to kind of see where's your baseline? Where are you sitting at dollar-wise, and how much more do you need to live on? And then where's that money going to come from? Am I going to pull some from each bucket as a way to mitigate some of my required minimum distributions? Does it make sense to do that and maybe some Roth conversions? So here's an example of somebody who came in and they have retired, they have low income years at the beginning. And then you can see those light blue lines that are going up like a ladder is when those fixed income sources are coming in. Social Security require minimum distributions. And you can see they're being bumped up into the 24, the 32, and then that kind of step down there is when one spouse passes away and the tax brackets get cut in half. And then all of a sudden they're jumping up into the 32, 35. So your situation is going to look different, but this is an example of kind of how to model it. And you can do this in a spreadsheet, you can do this in planning software, but outline that base scenario where those fixed income sources, those known sources are going to come from, and then play around with, okay, if I do Roth conversions, or if I take from X amount from my traditional IRA to help mitigate those required minimum distributions, does that help? So the next slide is going to show what if they tried to even this out a little bit over time. Instead of basically paying little to no taxes for the first half and then getting hit later on. So you can see they start getting into the 12 to 22% bracket, and you can look at this via Roth conversions, or maybe they needed it for spending, okay? But they're lowering those taxes, so then when required minimum distributions and Social Security hit, everything's kind of coming into that 24%. Getting over that 24% when one spouse passes away. We don't know when that's going to happen. We don't know how long that's going to last for, but it is something to take into account. And just the idea here is leveling those out versus having really low and high spikes later. Unless you think your goals are going to change to be a little bit more maybe charitably inclined than you are when you were younger. And then here's it kind of side by side. So you can see even they kind of eliminated that 35% potential even with the one spouse passing, and even the 32%, keeping everything in that 22, 24% range. Which that can add up quite a bit. Again, depending on your situation.
On that one right there, we took all their money to live on, or just did a full Roth, but we did a full Roth conversion up to the 200K.
So in this example, I intentionally didn't give you like their assets, because you can see they have no realized income, but you can have that if you're spending your money from a taxable brokerage account. And then maybe you do a Roth conversion to fill some up. And depending on what your assets are and where your required minimum distributions are going to be, how much does it make sense to do? So in this case, how much do we do to start leveling that out, to start bringing those lines down later? Whereas maybe somebody who didn't have as much assets, maybe they're doing it within the standard deduction or within the 10%. If they're living on taxable brokerage accounts. The question was, in 2026, they're doing a Roth conversion almost up to 200,000. And yes, in this particular case, because when you're modeling out a lot of years, this is kind of what it showed to start bringing those brackets down later. And the key point here is we'll talk about it, is you don't want to just model out 1 year, but you want to make sure you do this annually. So I might make a decision to do, in this case, close to 200,000 in 2026. In Q4, I'm making that decision. When 2027 comes around, I'm redoing this. This isn't my plan for the next X amount of years without reanalyzing it. Because as soon as I converted X amount of dollars, the whole plan changes. Because I just moved more money out, on top of you don't know what the market's going to do, how your life's going to change. There's a lot of different factors at play that it's never just, I look at it once and I'm done. So how to model this? First off, model it and by doing converting, say I'm going to convert nothing. So you have those fixed income sources, you say I'm going to convert nothing. Okay, where am I going to get my money to live on? Model that out. What does that look like? Where does that look for my future brackets? A lot of people just almost ignore that, just don't even do that. Then, what does it look like if I convert everything over a period of time? Now, this is drastic, but just many people don't look at these ends of the spectrum. For most people, convert everything is not going to be, you have to have the right cards, a very unique situation. Most people, it's not the right move. Convert nothing is the right move for more people than consider it. And then where most people fall is somewhere in that middle. And being a little bit more strategic with what makes sense for you. In your money situation, with your goals, what makes sense for you. And again, going back to laying out those fixed income sources in relation to your goals and how those change over time, where the money is going to heirs, to organizations, and then always leave a little bit of headroom. If you have the intention to convert up to the 12 or the 22% bracket or whatever the case may be, leave a little bit of headroom, leave a little bit of air, margin, whatever you want to call it, because maybe you overlooked how much dividends, interest, or whatever the case might be that you didn't factor in. So leave some margin for error.
What is the NIIT?
Net investment income tax. The NIIT is the net investment income tax. And these are just different lines that you want to be aware of. So the convert everything, where that kind of benefits and why it intrigues some people is because it's simple filing for then on forward, because you're not going to pay any taxes and you're turning off Social Security taxable income. The disadvantages, though, you're paying those taxes. You're paying them taxes now. It's not like you didn't pay those taxes. You're just paying them all up front. If somebody changed their mind, maybe they weren't now, but you know how our minds change. Maybe when they decided to convert everything, but 5 years later they became charitably inclined. So then that's kind of off the table. Beneficiaries, if your beneficiaries in a low tax bracket, does it make sense for you to eat up all those taxes if they were already in a low bracket? If you convert nothing, basically you're like, well, I'm projecting my retirement tax to be pretty low already. It's staying in the similar bracket. It just doesn't make sense. Converting nothing is really simple to execute. You don't have to do anything, and you can always change your mind. But you still want to do your due diligence. If you do nothing, are you unintentionally triggering something down the road? Or did you do your due diligence and you're like, no, I'm good. I'm not gonna have too high of RMDs. I'm not anywhere near IRMA. And then convert something, yeah.
If I convert everything and it puts me at a higher tax bracket, does everything fall under that higher tax bracket or just the amount between?
So let's say that you do a conversion. It's getting stacked on your pension that you're already taking, right? So if that pension fills up the 10% bracket and the conversion starts at the 12, I start my conversion at 12%, and then if I keep going, then the next dollar's in the 22, and so forth. So if I,
Part of it.
right, but if because some people have done this out there, converted everything in 1 year. You know, 100 and for a married couple, 100 and some thousand is going to be in the 12, or sorry, 76, and then the next is going to be in the 22. So you're going to be taxed pretty heavily as you keep going up. Yeah. The question was, if you decide to convert, you keep moving up the ladder. So going back to the tax brackets. All right. So converting some, it's about leveling out those taxes, kind of as we talked about. And you're less one-sided here. You can always kind of yearly make this decision. But as we kind of laid out, there is a lot of factors that you want to consider. Well, however you build the base plan, once you build the base plan to update it annually, it doesn't take as much time as initially. Initially, it's going to be some upfront. Yeah.
Age range where people should start considering some of this?
Well, when you're working, unless you have low income years, it's not going to make much sense. So for most people, unless they're taking a sabbatical or they're getting laid off or they're starting a business where they don't have much income or they're stay at home for a period of time, it's not going to make much sense when you're working. So then when you're retired, then it's like, okay, where's my income going to come from? Is when to start kind of looking at it. And because then you're going to have a better idea of what's the Social Security going to be, if you have a pension or not, the RMD age, what's that going to be? Because if we go back to that 20-year modeling scenario of laying out the pension and the other income sources, those first 10 years, it's okay. It's fairly accurate. You get out to 10, 20, you're not as accurate. And that's why you want to model it out still to make an educated decision, but that's why you're always coming back to this every year. But understand there's limitations when you're modeling out that long. But it does paint a picture of what the projections are going to be. But you don't know what the tax brackets are going to do. You don't know what the tax laws are going to do. You don't know what your returns are going to be. There's just a lot of variables that change. So errors that we often see is forgetting about who your heirs are, organizations or people, using different growth rates. So if you're modeling one, don't say my traditional IRA is going to grow 7% and my Roth IRA is going to grow 10% because I have higher growth assets in there. Well, let me tell you, Roth conversion is going to it's going to say do a Roth conversion because you're not looking at apples to apples. So when you want to say my asset allocation is going to stay the same. So if my projected return is 7%, do that in both cases, in your traditional IRA and Roth IRA. Because this is a tax decision. This is not an asset decision. Yes, you want to place your higher growth assets in a Roth, but you're still going to end up in the same asset allocation for your goals. Unless that changes, that's a whole different conversation. Just modeling a single year conversion, we talked about that. And modeling only once, because this is not a one-time deal. And then ignoring some of those thresholds. So that kind of wraps up the Roth conversion piece. We're going to move on to the accessing money pre-59.5. So any questions?
Quick question, you talked about doing early Roth conversions, like second quarter, something like that, and you recommended not to pay tax out of the traditional and to pay it out of a brokerage, correct? But do I need to pay taxes in quarter two if I'm employed, or do I wait till the end of the fiscal year to pay when I file my tax?
So the question was, when I was talking about doing a Roth conversion middle of the year, if I do a Roth conversion, for example, in quarter two, do I need to pay those taxes then or wait till I file? So to clarify, the only way I would do a Roth conversion middle of the year, other than quarter four, is if the market was down. So if the market's not down, I'm waiting till quarter four and my income is known, and then I just need to pay my taxes by January 15th. You can do the estimated tax filing 1040 EZ, and you do the same thing if you did in quarter two. You'd want to pay it when the next estimated payment is due. I don't have those off the top of my head. It's like June or something. But if you do a conversion in quarter two and you wait till you file, you're going to have a penalty.
Not advertised very often.
Yeah, you'll have a penalty.
What do you do with these?
I think it depends how much you convert, whatever the interest rate the Fed says. Any other questions before we move on? So accessing money before 59 and a half. This doesn't get talked about too much. There's a lot of tools out there for number one. So see these as different levers that can be pulled. And more than likely, you're not just going to use one. You're probably going to use 1, 2, 3, 4 different options. First up, we're going to go from kind of the simplest, the known ones, and move on from there. So spouse. If you have a spouse that's already working, that's a great way for somebody to retire early. And I know it's an obvious one, but it doesn't always get noticed. So do you have to get any other money to live on than your spouse working? Do you have any inherited accounts? Whether it's a non-retirement or retirement account, you know, it can be wise to use those first before touching any of your own assets. So do the obvious first, okay? From there, the foundation for a lot of people, it's not the only solution as we'll talk about, but the foundation for a lot of people is using a taxable brokerage account. This is the most flexible account because there's no age restrictions. You can control your capital gains. So, you know, somebody could be spending $100,000 per year, be well within the 0% capital gains bracket and not have to pay any taxes that year. If they're on the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits, they're going to actually want to realize some income because otherwise Affordable Care Act is going to push you to Medicaid. So if you're taking it all from the taxable brokerage account, that can be an opportunity to do a Roth conversion of some amount. And it's all going to fall within their standard deduction at 0%. Yep.
So I know you had mentioned that, so you can take out or convert that Roth from within that or another spot, but that's probably the best bet to do, even if you're past 59 and a half. You can take it out of your taxable brokerage account.
To pay the tax?
Well, pay the tax, or even if you're converting, that is the best way to convert from your taxable brokerage account if you're doing a conversion.
So the question is, on a conversion, where to pay the tax and how to do it. So when you're converting, it's from the IRA to a Roth, and then you can either do it from the IRA account or you can do it from your brokerage or your cash flow to pay the tax. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that or just when you're converting.
Or yeah, just from your IRA account, you can do it from there. So those are two different types of accounts. So you have the taxable brokerage account, you have a traditional IRA account that's pre-tax, and then you have a Roth IRA account that's post-tax, has already been taxed. So 3 different buckets, 3 different vehicles as you can think about them. The one caveat there as we're talking about this, if you do a Roth conversion under 59 and a half, pay it from cash flow or brokerage account. Otherwise, you're going to face a 10% penalty if you pay it out of the IRA account on the transfer. I'm going to repeat that. If you are under 59 and a half, have the cash flow or money from a brokerage account to pay the tax on the conversion, or don't do one. Otherwise, you're going to face a 10% penalty. Stock compensation, I'm not going to go through this because this could be its own class in itself, but just know it's an option to access some of these funds to be able to retire early. Rule of 55. So this applies to your current employer plan. The year you turn 55, you decide to retire. If your plan allows it, not all plans do. So you want to look at the summary plan description. Even you can talk to HR, but you want to get the facts. You want to look at your summary plan description to make sure that your plan allows it before you put in your retirement paperwork. So just because it's a rule doesn't mean that your employer allows it. This waives the 10% penalty, so there's no penalty. However, there is 20% mandatory withholding. And for most people, that's way too high, but that is what it is. So your best route behind that is, let's say 2026, somebody wants $100,000, rule of 55. They're forced to withhold 20%. 2027, they file their taxes, they get a refund. Take that off of what you need for 2027. So then you don't have to worry about taking as much. Maybe instead of 100,000 in 27, you're taking 90. So you're taking a little bit more that first year, but you're getting refunded that next year. That makes sense? For certain qualified public safety employees, this could be as early as age 50. This one's fairly similar in certain respects, but this is a different plan. So the Rule 55, if you have a 401k, a 403b, this is for governmental 457b plans. So this waives the early withdrawal penalty. This could be at any age. Still the 20% mandatory withholding, so you still have income tax that is applied, but this is another option that is beneficial for people as well. Health savings accounts, for those that have them. We talked about this a little bit last class. You can reimburse yourself for prior medical expenses. So if you're, during your working career, if you were paying out of pocket, you were keeping all those receipts, now you can start reimbursing yourself, and all that's tax-free. So that's not going to be realized as income. And then you can also, if you're on the Affordable Care Act plan, all bronze plans now are high deductible plans. So you can get an HSA through there, which allows you to lower your earned income. So if you were doing the Rule 55 or another option that we'll talk about, where you have pre-tax earned income, HSA can lower that to allow you to have more premium tax credits, and then also allow you to do more qualified medical expenses. At age 65, this turns into an IRA as well. So for non-qualified, you can still use it for qualified medical expenses, but at age 65, you can use it for non-qualified medical expenses with no penalty. You're still paying income tax. There's no required minimum distributions. So this is usually, if somebody has a built-up HSA, looking at this before their traditional IRA account, because at death, it's fully taxable to the beneficiary, non-spouse beneficiary. If you have a spouse, it acts just like an HSA, but for non-spouses, it's fully taxable in that year. Versus traditional IRA, they have 10 years. So the steps here: contribute to the HSA when you're working, you're lowering those taxes, invest in high return stock index funds to build that up. So then when you're paying medical expenses out of pocket, you're keeping those receipts as you're working. There's two places that I'm familiar with. I personally use Lively. You can upload your receipts. I've heard people use Fidelity. Same thing, can upload receipts. Otherwise, if you have a different HSA, you can always put them in your OneDrive. You can make an Excel sheet or however you want to track them. But keep track of them. The only way you're ever going to have to show them is if you get audited. And then you can pay medical expenses using the HSA. You're not able to do Affordable Care Act premiums, but you can do COBRA premiums. And then as you get a little older, along other qualified medical expenses as well. And Medicare premiums, but not Medigap. And then at 65, it turns into a traditional IRA. It doesn't turn into it, but it can be used like a traditional IRA for non-qualified expenses. And then there's no RMDs, but it's fully taxable to a non-spouse beneficiary.
Of course, the caveat to that is
Yeah, on top of if you're, you want to get your match at your workplace plan and whatever else you want to do. Yeah. But it's weighing, so if somebody has extra funds, it's weighing, do I contribute more to my 401k? Do I contribute to a Roth IRA, or do I keep loading the HSA? So it's kind of weighing those factors a little bit of what makes the most sense. Because you're saving quite a bit in taxes, especially depending on what bracket you're in, because It's no FICA, it's no state, it's no federal. But yeah, it's usually not an all or nothing kind of thing. Roth contribution basis. So at any point you contribute to a Roth, you can always get your contributions out tax and penalty free. Always. So take that into account. And if you haven't been tracking this, you can IRS form 5498. Every year they give you a form that has the IRA contributions on it. You can also go to the IRS website and you get a transcript so you can see the history. Or if you've always been at the same custodian, you can look at the history there. So if you haven't been tracking it these years, there's other avenues to go and get that information.
Just the basis of what you put in.
What?
What you gained out of that is tax or no?
So this is pre 59.5. Yep. So pre 59.5, your contributions are always tax and penalty free. The ordering, which I'm going to go more in depth if we have time at the end of this class, the ordering very briefly is, and you don't have to know this, but it's just automatically applied, is contributions, conversions, as we just talked about, earnings. Contributions, conversions, earnings. 72T, also known as substantial equal periodic payment. This is another pre-tax tool, like we talked about with Rule 55 or the Government 457B. This one's a little bit more intensive, so we have several slides in this one. It gives you penalty-free access. Essentially, it's you setting up your own pension for a period of years. You're doing it for 5 years or until 59.5, whichever is longer. So it's requiring a commitment. It's requiring you to be intentional about what you're doing, requiring documentation on what process you're doing. So the steps are, just like when you're working, you're contributing to the pre-tax account. You decide to retire before 59.5. This is one of your options. You determine the SEP calculation, which we'll go through an example on the next slide. And then from there, and you want to use multiple sources, multiple calculators. If this is of interest to you, shoot me an email. I can send you a couple calculators that are out there for free, because if you're doing this, you want to have use multiple calculators. And then you're going to roll over your account to an IRA, so if it's in your workplace plan. And then you're going to direct the custodian. You're going to have one 72T IRA and one non-72T IRA. So just round numbers, let's say somebody had $1 million and they wanted to split up $700,000 in a 72T IRA and the rest $300,000 in a non-72T IRA. Because that 72T IRA, that money cannot be touched other than what you have to withdraw until 5 years or 59.5 or longer. 5 years, whatever's longer. Otherwise, you're going to face penalties. And save copies of the calculations that you used. Document, save copies of those statements when you open the account, so it's clear what the balance was when you determine that calculation. So there's 3 different things here at play. The interest rate, this is determined by the IRS and the taxpayer. So you're looking at the 120% midterm federal rate of the last 2 months, or you're using 5%. So this changed just recently that even if that midterm federal rate is less than 5, it's automatically minimum 5% that you use for this number. Then you do the life expectancy factor. So you look up single life expectancy table from the IRS, and depending on what age you are, they have a factor, just like when you're at required minimum distribution age, they have a number. And then you determine your payment. So how much do you want? Do you want $50,000? Do you want $100,000? How much do you need to live on for this? And the best method right now, there's 3 different methods you can choose from, but the best method right now is a fixed amortization method, because it allows the least amount in the 72T IRA for the highest payment. Ideally, you want the least amount that you possibly can have in the 72T, so you have flexibility otherwise. So here's an example. Couple age 54, they want $72,000 per year, $6,000 per month. The IRS published rate, they looked it up, it's 4.6%. But at minimum, they get 5%, so they're going to use 5%. They look up single life expectancy table 3 and 54, it's 32.5. So they back from that calculation, they need, based upon those numbers, they need that exact amount, a little over $1.1 million in that 72T IRA to produce that $72,000 per year. The back of an envelope math, if you want to use before doing this, is use 6% withdrawal rate. So if you want $100,000 per year, you need roughly 1.67 million to do a 72T IRA. That's going to get you pretty close. So how's it taxed? So just as you follow the 0%, the standard deduction, then the 10, then the 12. So that $72,000, $6,000 per month comes out net to be about $5,500 per month that they live on for about a $1.1 million 72T IRA. Now, this has to go on for 5 years or 59.5, whichever's longer. What happens if they need more money? Because this is not inflation adjusted. This is like an IPERS payment, okay? So they can take that non-72T IRA that they split at the beginning, and they can split that again and do the same process all over and come up with how much more do they need. Do they need, in this example, they started with $72,000. Do they need another $10,000, or how much more do they need? What if they want to decrease them? What if you got an inheritance year 2 or whatever the case may be, and you want to decrease the payment? You have one time that you can change it. So let's just take this couple. Now they're 2 years later, 56. So they're still doing the $72,000 payment. They're one-time switch from the fixed amortization method to the RMD method. So they're re-looking at the life expectancy table, and they have to look at the prior year balance of what it was, the value of the IRA was on December 31st. Just like when you're at required minimum distribution age, you look at the balance on December 31st of every year, and you apply that factor to determine what you have to take the following year. By doing that, they decrease their payment by over 50%. So for some reason, you're not able to switch it back, so you have to be pretty sure that you don't need it. But all of a sudden, if you come into money or a job or whatever the case might be, you do have one option to change it. So when does it end again? 5 years or 59.5 or longer. Another option for those that have pensions, you take the lump sum. Do you start it right away or do you delay it? Again, this is more earned income. And then Roth conversion ladder, this is the last in-depth one. So we talked about Roth conversions. So somebody who's retired early, they can use this as a strategy to access money. Again, you want to have the money to pay outside, but this can minimize years by choosing which ones you do Roth conversions at. Again, if your income is low enough, it could be completely tax-free. If you have money in a brokerage account that you're withdrawing from, you could use a Roth conversion, utilizing the standard deduction. And then if you end up not needing it, well, then it's just sitting in the Roth IRA. The cons, you're waiting 5 years after each conversion. So if we take that couple who's retiring at 54, in order for them to access a Roth conversion at 54, they need to have to do that at 49, because you have to wait 5 years. So you'd almost need to set a bridge. You'd almost need to have a bridge up. Okay? It'd be like somebody retiring at 50 and they need to set a bridge up until 55. A bridge meaning they need monies from somewhere else before they can access their conversions. Was that what you were gonna?
Well, no, so the money they're still on.
So the first money that's coming out is contributions. Yes, it's because it goes contributions then conversions. So that could be part of their bridge of while they're waiting for, because if you do you have to wait. If you do a conversion, here, let me give you an example here. I thought I had it. So if you do a conversion at age 50, you are not able to access it until 55. The conversion money, that 1 year conversion money. So if you do 50,000 at age 50, that 50,000 comes accessible at 55. You do another 50,000 at 51, that comes accessible at 56. You do one at 52, that comes accessible at 57. So it's 5 years after that specific conversion.
So if you convert $50,000, 55 rolls around, you got access to all $60,000.
Tax and penalty free. And it's going to come, if you didn't touch the Roth IRA before then, your contributions come out first, and then your conversions. But you want to make sure those conversions are 5 years old. So the steps are, you decide to retire before 59 and a half, you're rolling that money into an IRA similar to the 72T. You convert from the traditional IRA to the Roth. Again, you want to make sure you have outside dollars though to pay those taxes. Otherwise, you're going to pay the 10% penalty. And then you're waiting those 5 years. And then you can withdraw tax and penalty free. So this one, usually people don't choose 72T and Roth conversion ladder because you already have pre-tax money from the 72T. But people, for some reason, like one more than the other. The 72T locks you in more. You have one chance to change it to an RMD. But the Roth conversion ladder, you got to factor in, you got to wait 5 years to be able to access that money. So that's the downside of that one.
Still have the income tax constraints or considerations.
Yes. Yep. You do.
They can take, if you make it 50 years old, you make it $5,000 a year. Convert $50,000.
Well, and so that goes, the question was, when you're working and you have $100,000 and you want to do a 50,000 conversion, and that goes back to, it's usually not the best to convert when you're working. So that's about having that bridge. Do I have a bridge from my HSA money or Rule of 55 or Roth contributions or part-time income or whatever it might be to make a bridge to get to that point? Because right now, married filing jointly, it's $130,000 to fill up that 12% bracket. So and then it comes back to how much do you need to live on each year? Yeah.
So if you were in your early 60s, you could think about, or even after 65, some of those Roth conversions would get you set up so you have money when it's required minimum distribution time, right? Or no?
So usually the Roth conversion ladder makes sense for pre-59 and a half. It doesn't make as much sense after that because you can access your earnings after 59 and a half. The last option here, paying the 10% penalty, not usually the best option, but I'm sure somebody out there can argue it. For somebody who's maybe 57, 58 later on, and they got let go for whatever reason, is kind of spur of the moment, what options do they have available? I would still want to consider 72T, even though I know I have to have it go on for 5 years. Where would I get the money anyway is kind of what you would want to factor in versus paying the penalty. So this is all the options out there of what we talked about. The inherited accounts, the taxable, the government 457B, Rule 55, 72T, Roth conversion ladder, health savings account, Roth basis, and 10% penalty. And for most people, it's going to be a combination. Rarely is it just you're choosing one. I mean, it does happen. For some people, they have a large enough taxable brokerage that they can do it, or all their money's in a pre-tax IRA that they just do the 72T. Because again, if you do the 72T, you can have up to 130,000 and be within the 12% bracket at the end. Some of it's being taxed at 0, 10, and 12. And when you're putting money into that, more than likely you were in a higher bracket. So you're out ahead tax-wise, as long as it makes sense. You have enough assets to spend X amount of dollars. Yes.
If you do the 72T, you have to base it on traditional IRA and 401k accounts. You have to do it on Roth.
I've never heard it done on when you do the question was when you do a 72T IRA, is it on traditional accounts or 401ks or Roths? First, you're going to want to move your 401k to a traditional IRA. It's cleaner, it's simpler. I've never heard it done on a Roth. I'm not sure, just initially thinking about it, what the advantage would be with that. But you can always have access to your contributions, and those are coming out first. I'm just trying to think through it.
So the scenario, your scenario that I'm pumping money into a Roth IRA, and I'm only putting it into when I get around to 55. I have a smaller pool.
Because it's just contributions. Correct. Yeah, and that goes back a little bit to, what marginal bracket are we in? Because it's coming off the top. When we say we're saving into our retirement accounts and we're in the 12 or the 22, we're paying 22 cents on the dollar. If we're going Roth, or we're saving 22 cents if we're going traditional. So it's weighing that along with, if somebody wants to retire before 59 and a half, how do I create those options? And I might need to bite a tax bullet at the time, or am I going to bite it later, or what? It's the trade-offs. But these are the best options that are out there, and I know it probably doesn't. No, there isn't, and there isn't really for Roth conversions either. Well, if you touch your earnings before 59.5, that's penalty too. So we didn't have enough time to talk about the 2-5 Roth rules because that gets pretty crazy. But I'll be around for other questions if other people have them. No, Mike's got to get going. Good.